The Perihelion Grace went quiet 41 light-years out, and by the time anybody understood the message, the woman who sent it had been dead for 4 decades. That is not a tragedy. That is just distance, and everybody who works out there has made their peace with it. The tragedy was in the message itself, which was 14 minutes long, technically flawless, and which ended with a sentence that a communications officer named Idris Bakare had clearly written and rewritten and finally left in because there was no honest way to leave it out. Drive is gone. We are coasting at cruise. 11,000 sleepers are stable and will remain stable. We will arrive at nothing in 306 years, unless somebody comes. She was not asking. That is what people always get wrong when they retell it. Bakare was a professional with a functioning grasp of orbital mechanics, and she knew precisely what she was describing: a hull with no drive, on a fixed vector, at a speed nobody could match without a fuel budget that did not exist anywhere in human space. She was not asking for rescue. She was filing a report, accurately, and the last sentence was there because the report would have been incomplete without it. The Grace was carrying 11,040 people in cold sleep, plus a working crew of 31 who were not. The crew would be dead in 6 years, the sleepers would not. That was the whole shape of the problem, and it was visible to anyone who looked at it for 90 seconds. The sleepers were fine. The sleepers would go on being fine for centuries, in a hull that was structurally sound, powered by a reactor with a 400-year fuel load, drifting in a straight line toward a region of space with nothing in it whatsoever. There was no emergency. There was never going to be an emergency. There was just a slow object, going somewhere pointless, with 11,000 people asleep inside it, and an arrival date that nobody alive would see. The intercept problem was solved in 8 days. It had exactly one answer, and the answer was absurd. You cannot catch the Perihelion Grace. You can only get in front of her. This is the part that stops most retellings, because it requires holding 2 numbers in your head at once, and neither of them is intuitive. The Grace was moving at cruise, call it a quarter of light speed. Any ship sent after her has to accelerate to that speed to match, and then it has to carry enough fuel to slow the Grace down, and then enough to bring everyone home. And the mass required to do all 3 from a standing start at Earth exceeds, by a comfortable margin, the total fuel humanity had ever produced. The alternative is not clever. It is just patient. You do not send one ship, you send a chain. Ship 1 accelerates hard on a full load, burns most of it, and drops a fuel package on the Grace's vector, moving fast. Ship 2 launches years later, catches the package because the package is already moving, uses it to go faster than Ship 1 ever could, and drops a bigger package further along. Ship 3 does it again. Each link in the chain is throwing fuel further downrange than the last, and none of them ever touches the Grace, and the only ship that matters is the last one, which arrives with a full tank because everybody before it spent their lives building a road out of thrown fuel. 9 links. That was the number the Intercept office produced in the 8th day and never significantly revised. 9 ships, 91 years, and every crew on links 1 through 8 would be doing a job whose entire purpose was to make somebody else's job possible. The first response from the funding committee is a matter of public record, and it is not shameful, whatever people say now. They asked the obvious question, which was whether 11,000 sleepers who were in no distress, who would not age, who did not know anything was wrong, constituted an emergency worth 91 years of continuous industrial commitment. The answer, delivered by an intercept planner named Osei, who had not slept properly in a fortnight, is the reason the program happened at all. They are not in distress, he said. They are in our care. Those are different words, and they have different obligations attached, and I would like the committee to say out loud which one it is choosing. The committee funded Link 1. It did not fund Link 2, and it made a point of saying so. Link 1 launched 14 months later, and was, by any technical standard, a disappointment. The Kettering was an ore tender, with a strapped-on drive package crewed by 6, and her whole mission was to accelerate for 13 months, release a fuel canister on a precisely computed vector, and then coast for the rest of her operational life because she would not have the reserve to turn around. Her crew knew this going in. They had volunteered for it, and the selection board had rejected 60 candidates before finding 6 who understood the assignment and wanted it anyway. They released the canister 13 months and 4 days out. It was 200 tons of reaction mass in a dumb shell with a transponder, and it went downrange at a speed no human object had ever sustained, and it would take 8 years to reach the point where Link 2 could catch it. Then the Kettering coasted. Her crew lived aboard for another 19 years. They had been given the option of a return trajectory that would have taken 31 years and used the fuel they were carrying for station keeping, and they had declined it collectively before launch in writing, which the program office had found so uncomfortable that it commissioned a psychological review. The review found 6 people of entirely ordinary mental health who had done arithmetic. The Kettering transmitted for 19 years, not distress, not sentiment, telemetry, canister tracking refinements, and, because her navigator was bored and methodical, the single most accurate set of deep space density measurements anybody had produced, which shaved 4 years off Link 4's transit and was worth, by the program's own accounting, more than the canister. The last transmission from the Kettering is a position fix and a note that reads, in full, package tracking nominal. Good hunting, Link 2. Link 2 had not been funded. Link 2 would not be funded for another 6 years. The crew of the Kettering died, not knowing whether the thing they had spent their lives on would be continued, and they had known from the beginning that they would not know, and they went anyway. That is the part that funded Link 2, not the argument, the note. The program survived 91 years, and it did not survive them gracefully. It was cancelled twice, it was reorganized under 4 different agencies, moved between 3 jurisdictions, and audited 17 times, and on 2 occasions the audit found real and serious misuse of funds. A program director went to prison in year 34. Link 5 was delayed 6 years by a labor dispute that had nothing to do with the Grace and everything to do with pension arrangements at the yard that was building her, and the 6-year slick cost Link 7 a fuel margin. It never recovered, which is why Link 8 had to be redesigned twice. There was no continuous public enthusiasm. There were periods, 3 of them, by the standard analysis, where the Long Rescue was the most popular civic project in human space, and there were much longer periods where it was a line item that people who had not been born when it started found faintly ridiculous. The thing that kept it alive was not passion. It was structural, and it was deliberate, and it was designed in year 7 by an administrator named Halloran who had watched the Kettering transmissions and drawn a cold conclusion that no institution sustains a commitment across 90 years on feeling, and that if the Grace was going to be reached, the reaching had to be made harder to stop than to continue. So she made it a debt. Each link was funded by a bond that matured on the delivery of the next link's canister. Cancelling the program did not save money, it triggered the default. She wrote the obligation into the founding compact of 2 colonies whose charters were being drafted that decade, so that abandoning the Grace required amending a constitution. She arranged for the sleepers next of kin, and there were, after 3 generations, a great many of them to hold a legal interest that could be litigated. It was cynical. Halloran said so herself at the end without apology. You cannot ask 90 years of strangers to care, she said. You can only make it expensive for them to stop. The crews were a different problem, and it was not solved by anybody. It was simply endured. Link 4's commander, Inés Carvalho, put it into the record in a way that the program office found so unhelpful that it was suppressed for a decade and is now on the wall in the training hall at Vecchio. We are not rescuers, she said. Let us stop calling ourselves that. A rescuer arrives. I am going to spend 22 years of my life accelerating a tank of fuel to a speed I will never use, so that a woman who is currently 6 years old can go faster than me, so that her grandson can arrive. I will never see the Grace. My crew will never see the Grace. If the program fails after I am dead, I will have spent my life on nothing, and I will not have the courtesy of finding out. This is not rescue. This is masonry. We are laying a course of brick in a cathedral, and I would like the recruiting material to say so because we keep losing good people in year 3 when they work it out for themselves, and we would lose fewer if we told them at the door. The recruiting material was changed. Retention improved. The phrase, laying a course, entered the program's internal language and stayed there for 60 years. And by Link 7, the crews were using it as a verb, and there is a tradition, undocumented, never official, first recorded on Link 6, where a crew that has released its canister marks the hull with a single horizontal line and nothing else. Link 9's hull, when she was finally photographed at the Intercept, carried 8 lines that had been painted there by 8 crews who never met each other, 7 of whom were dead. Her own line was painted last, by her navigator, and it is slightly crooked, and it was left that way. The Perihelion Grace was overtaken in the 91st year of the program by a ship called Long Answer, crewed by 14, commanded by a woman named Priya Osei Marchetti, whose great-grandfather had asked a funding committee to choose its words carefully. She did not mention that at the time. It came out later in an archive search, and she was privately irritated about it for the rest of her life because it made the story tidy in a way she felt was dishonest to the other 8 crews. The approach took 4 months. Long Answer had come up the road her predecessors built, catching packages at intervals that had been computed decades before she launched by people working with pencil and confidence, and every single one of them had been where it was supposed to be. That is worth sitting with. 8 canisters thrown across 90 years by crews who could not adjust them after release, and the worst positional error in the chain was 22,000 kilometers, which at those speeds is a rounding artifact. The Grace was exactly as Bakare had described her. Structurally sound. Reactor nominal. 11,040 sleepers stable. In a hull that had been coasting in a straight line for 91 years without a single system requiring intervention, because it had been built by people who expected to be far away from help. The working crew of 31 were in the forward hold, where they had put themselves in order over the course of 6 years as their consumables ran out. The last 3 had sealed the hold from the inside and left the manifest on the outer hatch with every name checked off in the same handwriting. Idris Bakare's name is 4th from the bottom. A final log is not addressed to a rescue party. Nobody aboard the Grace ever knew a program existed. The first canister was released 4 years after the last of them died. She left a technical handover, reactor state, sleeper bay tolerances, a list of 20 things she thought a salvage crew would want to know, and then, at the end, one line that was not technical. Somebody will come. Not for us. Do not spend anything on us. They spent something on them anyway, and the argument about it lasted longer than the rescue did. Long Answer had margin. Not much, but real. The accumulated conservatism of 9 crews who had each padded their numbers slightly because none of them wanted to be the link that failed. Osei Marchetti had roughly 400 tons of unallocated reaction mass, and a decision that the program, in 91 years of exhaustive planning, had somehow never written a procedure for. The sleepers came first. That was never in question, and it did not take a discussion. The transfer began within 9 hours of docking and took 5 weeks, and it was flawless. And the medical outcome across 11,040 people was 1 death from an unrelated cardiac condition in a woman who had gone into the tank with it, undiagnosed. The question was the forward hold. Bringing 31 bodies home cost mass. Mass cost margin, and margin was the difference between a comfortable return and a return that would need favors from 2 colonies. Bakare had left explicit instructions in writing that nothing be spent on them. She had been the senior surviving officer, and it was her call to make, and she had made it. and she had been dead for 95 years. Idris Bakare took it to her crew because she did not want it to be hers alone, and the vote was 14-0, and the entry she made afterwards is 4 sentences long. Officer Bakare instructed us not to spend anything on her crew. She wrote that when the only ship that could come for them did not exist, and she wrote it so that nobody would hesitate over her. We are not hesitating. We have the mass. The road her people never knew about was built by 8 crews who also expected nothing, and this ship does not leave anybody on the wrong side of that arithmetic. They brought them all home. It cost the return leg 14 weeks and a resupply that 2 colony assemblies argued about for a year and then quietly paid. The 11,040 woke up in a civilization that had moved on 91 years without them, and this turned out to be the hardest part of the entire program, and nobody had planned for it at all. They had gone to sleep expecting to wake at a colony that was now going to be founded by somebody else. Their contracts were void. Their qualifications were 3 generations stale. Their money had been in accounts that had been through 2 currency reforms and a jurisdictional collapse. Several hundred of them had living descendants, grandchildren older than they were, who had spent their lives as the next of kin of people in a legal category nobody had ever needed before. The program had spent 91 years and the industrial output of a small world on getting them, and had allocated, for what came afterwards, a single office with a staff of 9. It was Carvalho's granddaughter who fixed it, which is a coincidence and not a destiny, and she fixed it by doing the same thing her grandmother had done, putting an unhelpful truth into the record where it could not be ignored. "We built a road for 91 years, she wrote, and we stopped building it 400 meters from the door. Every one of these people is a citizen of nowhere, with a skill set from the last century and a family who grieved them. We did not rescue 11,000 people, we moved them. The rescue is the part we have not funded yet." That got funded too. It took 19 years, it was less glamorous than the canisters, and it is the part of the long rescue that nobody makes documentaries about. There is a memorial, and it is the wrong one, and everybody involved knows it. It is at Vecchio, and it is 9 columns, and it is beautiful, and it lists the crews. 206 names across 91 years, including the 31 from the forward hold, who were on the 9th column because there was nowhere else that made sense to put them. The reason it is wrong is that it looks like a monument to sacrifice, and the long rescue was not a sacrifice. It was a payment schedule. 206 people did ordinary, competent work in difficult conditions across 3 generations, and the overwhelming majority of them died of old age, at home, having finished their contracts and drawn their pensions, and complained about the program office at length to anybody who would listen. Idris Bakare spent the last 20 years of her life being asked to explain what made the crews special, and refusing, with increasing bluntness, to accept the premise. "Nothing made us special," she said. "We had a schedule, and the schedule was long. Ask me what made it work, and I will tell you, and it is not going to satisfy you, because the answer is that Halloran made quitting expensive, and Carvalho made the job honest. And between those 2 things, there was never a year where stopping was easier than carrying on. You want it to be about courage. It was about arrangements. We are very good at arrangements, and we are not especially brave, and if you build the arrangements properly, you do not need people to be brave for 91 years, which is fortunate, because nobody is. The Perihelion Grace is still out there. They did not bring her home, there was never any prospect of it, and she was not worth it. She was stripped of anything useful. Her reactor was left running at minimum, and she was given a transponder with a 4,000-year power budget, and she is still on the vector Idris Bakare described, still coasting toward a region of space with nothing in it. And she will get there in about 215 years and continue past it. The transponder broadcasts a position and a manifest. The manifest lists 11,040 names and then 31 more, and every name in both lists is marked recovered, which is a designation the program had to invent and which appears nowhere else in human record keeping. There was a proposal in the fourth decade after the intercept to switch the transponder off. It was raised on entirely sensible grounds. The hull is a navigation hazard on a timescale of centuries, the broadcast is a minor spectrum cost, and there is nobody aboard. The counter-argument was made by a woman in her 90s who had been 10 years old at the intercept and had grown up on the story, and it did not appeal to sentiment at all. It appealed instead to the specific thing the program had learned about itself over 91 years, and it took her one sentence. "We are not good at remembering," she said. "We are good at leaving things running." The transponder stays on. It costs almost nothing. Every 90 seconds it says where the Perihelion Grace is and that everybody who was ever aboard her came home, and it will keep saying it for 4,000 years to nobody in a straight line forever. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.